Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be ranking each and every adaptation of Frank Herbert's iconic novel, Dune. Now I've got a playlist comprising of a review for the book, as well as a comparison video for each adaptation. So if you're interested, check it out and then come back to this video. So we're going to be looking at the 1984 movie directed by David Lynch, the 2000 miniseries directed by John Harrison, and the two movies directed by Denis Villeneuve, and I'll be ranking both of those films as a single entry. I won't be including Children of Dune, seeing that it's technically an adaptation of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which are the second and third books in the Dune series. Just a reminder that if you're not caught up on all of these adaptations, there will be some spoilers in this video, so you've been warned. And with that out the way, let's begin. So coming in at number 3 is gonna be Frank Herbert's Dune, the 2000 miniseries. Now don't get me wrong, this wasn't a bad adaptation. In fact, there's no such thing in my mind as a bad adaptation of Dune. You know, I appreciate this miniseries for being a more faithful and more fleshed out experience compared to the David Lynch film. Alec Newman's portrayal of Paul Atreides was quite memorable, Graham Revell's musical score was fantastic, and I also liked the more prominent role that Princess Irulan had compared to the book. But the production values were abysmal, even for their time. From the cheap sets, to the flat cinematography, to the low-budget CGI. Ugh. Not to mention, it looked like the costume designers were on cocaine or speed or crack or whatever. I don't know. The acting is occasionally wonky. The pacing can be a bit tedious since this version of the story tried to adapt everything from the book. And I wasn't totally on board with some of the creative liberties, like the way Duncan Idaho's death played out. The fact that an actual assassin that snuck in the Hunter Seeker to kill Paul was caught. The casting of an adult in the role of Paul, as well as that teleporting trick of his that I just have to call bullshit on. You know, just small things like that here and there. So on the whole, it wasn't terrible, but I think if you're unfamiliar with the source material, I guess I could recommend this one just for the experience. And who knows, maybe with time, this version will grow on me. So I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Coming in at number 2 is gonna be Dune 1984. While this may be yet another lackluster adaptation of Frank Herbert's novel, it has a certain charm to it being a product of the 80s. And I can easily treat it as a guilty pleasure despite its flaws. The elaborate production values have aged well for the most part. Kyle MacLachlan's portrayal of Paul Atreides is extremely underrated in my opinion. Toto's dreamlike soundtrack for the film, as well as the overall surrealness thanks to David Lynch's directing. But in order to trim the film down to a roughly 2-hour runtime, a lot of key elements had to be cut out completely, resulting in an unevenly paced, disjointed, and bloated narrative structure. Some of the creative liberties were tacky as well. The casting of an adult in the role of Paul yet again, the overuse of expository voiceovers, the weirding module being a gun instead of a form of martial arts because David Lynch, quote, didn't want to see kung fu on sand dunes, and of course the ending, where Paul is pretty much depicted as a god that is meant to bring peace where there is war, you know, rather than just declaring holy war like he does in the book. And don't get me started on the rain. You know, Paul didn't make it rain at the end of the book, and realistically, the rain would have killed the sandworms. There's some other surface level issues as well, such as the occasionally over-the-top acting, and the sets for House Harkonnen felt cheap and unfinished. And apparently they weren't finished, judging from the obvious green screens on the walls. Nonetheless, as I've said before, I can treat it as a guilty pleasure of sorts. But in all honesty, I'm sticking with a 6 out of 10. But of course, my number 1 pick can only be Denis Villeneuve's Dune and Dune Part 2. This 2-part adaptation of Frank Herbert's legendary novel is the best on-screen version of such an iconic story to date. The combined runtime of just over 5 hours gives the overall story plenty of breathing room. The visuals are an extraordinary technical achievement. Hans Zimmer's scores perfectly encapsulate the otherworldly feeling of Dune. The acting is top tier, coming from an A-list cast, including Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides, Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica, Zendaya as Shani, Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron, and of course Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. The action is beautifully filmed, and a lot of the creative liberties taken in part 2 were quite a surprise to me, like Shani's character arc, the fact that Paul's sister Alia hadn't even been born yet, Feyd-Rautha and Lady Fenring having a child, Gurney Halleck getting his revenge on Raban, and the biggest shock to me was the fact that Paul ends up being the one to kill the Baron rather than Alia. And I didn't mind the absence of Thufir Hawat and Count Fenring due to their scenes being cut from the finished product, but the door is always open for them to appear in a potential third film based on Dune Messiah, which I really hope does get made. The films aren't perfect, however, with both of them being over 2.5 hours long each, they are a bit exhausting in places, and the first film's decision to end with the fight between Paul and Jamis was always strange to me. I would have preferred to have seen it in Dune Part 2 and have it play out almost exactly the way it did in the book. But these are just small issues, I think both of these films are extraordinary, with Dune Part 2 being the superior one. I've had the pleasure of seeing both of these films in theaters, and that only enhanced my enjoyment of both of them. So I'm gonna give part 1 an 8 out of 10, and I'm gonna give part 2 a 9. So overall, I'm gonna give this 2-part adaptation an 8.5 out of 10. So yeah, that was my ranking of all the Dune adaptations. I want to thank everybody for their support over the last few days. My last 2 videos have done really well. Going forward, I don't have any major plans laid out, but in April I'm going to be reviewing the new Walking Dead spin-off, The Ones Who Live. I've seen the first 3 episodes as of this recording, and I'm really enjoying it so far. At some point around June, I wanted to cover a show called The Leftovers, since the 10th anniversary is around that time, and it's an incredible show. I think everybody needs to check it out. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Please be sure to like the video, share it and subscribe, ring the bell. Take care, and I'll see you soon.